Minecraft Winston Salem is gone.
Oh my god.
Well, at least the new buildings that you saw me build in the last 2 episodes are gone. As if they never even happened in the first place, the O'Hanlon building and 1 West 4th have vanished into thin air. But how is that possible? Is this a cruel trick by the gods of Minecraft, or something more? Okay, let me explain what happened. See, Build the Earth is composed of separate build teams. The leads of these separate build teams are allowed to manage their servers however they see fit. Now, there is a Build the Earth server network that Build the Earth Carolinas used to be a part of, but a little over a year ago, the Carolinas team moved out to a new server host, Wither Hosting. In January of 2021, Wither Hosting updated their terms of service regarding backup plugins that are designed to allow for automatic backups of servers. The TOS update basically banned any and all automatic backup plugins from being used through Wither Hosting. This information was never told to the leads of the Carolina server, which at the time used Aroma Backup to make automatic backups of the server. On September 7th, one of the Carolina team leads, Finn Del Mundo, decided to make a manual backup, and then made another manual backup on the 20th, prompted by noticing how unreliable Wither Hosting's backup system was being. All was well until December 4th, when the world caved in. 10:06 a.m., an email from Wither Hosting comes in explaining the existence of the backup plugin ban. No further information was given. 10:43 p.m., a full 12 hours later, Cybersynth, one of our other team leads, notices that the server IP address has been changed and the file size of our server has become smaller. It turns out that after sending the email, Wither Hosting deleted the BTE Carolina server as well as any automatic updates that the plugin had created. No notice, no warning, no chance to remove the plugin. In a matter of hours, 3 months of work was gone. Many members of the team took this news quite hard. But I wasn't all that upset by it, since I had basically recorded the entire building process for both the O'Hanlon and 1 West 4th building. I basically had created an in-depth guide for how to rebuild both of them from the ground up. As for the server status now, don't worry, it's safely in the hands of Cybersynth now, so there's no worries about any future server crashes. However, in the unlikely event that this does happen again, I have some personal schematic files saved for each building on my own computer now. Now, I don't want to sit here and bore you guys with the rebuilding process, but trust me when I say that in a matter of days, both buildings were back to their full glory as if the crash never even happened. So, what are we building today, you wonder to yourself, frothing at the mouth over the unbearable agony of having to wait 2 extra minutes at the beginning of a video? Well, back in September, Cyber reached out to me and told me that the team leads had decided to move up a project event that they had in mind following the server apocalypse earlier that month. This was the Rebuild Winston Salem event. From December 26th to January 2nd, the server would host an event dedicated to rebuilding those 2 lost buildings from the server crash, as well as expanding the progress of Winston Salem. This was the plot, a block of old industrial buildings just north of 5th Street. We also had additional city blocks ready to begin work should we actually complete the project early. And thus, Rebuild Winston Salem was on in full swing. But before we jump into the building process, I just want to remind you guys to hit that like button and also subscribe if you enjoy this content, and hit that bell so you can be updated on every video we have coming out. It's a really small gesture, but it helps out immensely and lets me know that you guys really enjoy this series and want to see more. But let's not waste any more time, let's get into Rebuild Winston Salem. I wasn't able to hop on until the second day, but on the first day of building, Cybersynth and Finn began construction on the southmost buildings. Finn went through and used the /tpll command to create the outlines of most of the buildings in the block, and they also created some facades that were present as well. I started by cleaning up some of the building outlines and built a little spawning platform for the people to see when they first warped to the event. I made it look like a tiny version of some of the most prominent buildings in the city. After that, I built a simple facade just to get the idea of the direction I would take these types of buildings. I picked a building that had a facade on both sides of the block and shelled the outline. On the west facade of the building, there was this unique roof structure. It was a sloped roof that didn't actually go over the entire building. I guess its goal was to make the building look more homey from the ground, but in the era of Google Maps, yeah, it just looks really weird. Dark prismarine ended up being a good block to represent that dark forest green that's painted on top. I finished off the flat section of the roof with some good old coal block to give it that built in the 40s, last maintained in the 50s look. Wait, mushroom. Nope. Yep, there you go. That's much better. Thank you. It was time to add the windows along this dingy side here. Yes, in Build the Earth, it is even crucial to decorate the sides of the building that don't get to be seen by the public much at all. We're Minecraft builders, not amateurs. I used end rods to represent these plumbing, electrical, tubey things, I don't know, that ran along the side of the building. Look, my job isn't to know what these things are, just how to make them look right. I started shelling the building next door since Finn and Cyber had already added the facade the day earlier. Yeah, you could say I got distracted from what I was doing, but in my defense, shelling is like 60% of the battle. You could shell an entire city and never do anything else to it, and it would look pretty close to being done. The roof at the back end of the building was rusted over, so I played around with some combination granite, white terracotta, and brick to give it this gradient reddish-white look where appropriate. It was time to get back to the other building and finish off that facade. This building was an art studio and an ice cream shop, and it had a big plastic ice cream cone on the front of it. So I just slapped a player head on and called it a day. Yay, facade done! No, I'm just kidding. I finished the rest of the facade properly as well. The buildings, as well as other buildings along this block, have very strange front entrances. They often jut in at a slight angle from the rest of the building, meaning not only did I have to find the rise-run angle of the real building itself, but I also had to find a secondary rise-run for the front doors. I mainly did this using trial and error until I found an angle that felt right. There's really no other way to go about this. I added in the large glass windows that made up a majority of the first floor. I started experimenting with the sidewalk line, though sidewalks and roads are not my forte. I also added a traffic cone in for good measure to let people know that this area is still under construction and they better be careful when walking around here. I added the front awning. It's a fairly simple build, but that's what you get with the majority of these industrial buildings. The windows were cooperative enough. I even experimented with using glass panes instead of glass blocks. Usually I sink the glass block in by a layer, but I think this glass pane design works pretty well. I sort of tried to add the white sign atop the building with the letters AOI on it. The letters were easy enough, I just used some player heads. But there were also these art palettes on either side that I tried to find a good player head to represent this, but none of the heads worked quite well. I'd love for them to add a head in the database that's an art palette on the front of the face rather than on the top, but until then I've just decided to leave it blank for now. I detailed the little alleyway between the AOI building and the building next door with some trash cans and a chain link fence, and yeah, that was pretty much the end of that build, so on to the next one. The next day I began working on the neighboring buildings on the east side of the block. Most of the buildings along this side are just warehouses with large garage doors, so there's really not much to talk about. I was basically just repeating the same details in different patterns. One garage door is gonna look like every other garage door. I did have some fun adding this little metal protrusion that I assume used to hold a sign. Oh, and these edge tubes that lead to some power supply boxes. Oh, look how small he is compared to the other building. He's just a little fella, look at him go. Right next door to the little fella sits a vacant lot. I think a building used to be here at some point. Why that building's gone now, I couldn't tell you, but I did end up adding a chain link fence across the front and building up the shell of the surrounding buildings. I also slapped a black roof on the little fella and started representing the detail in the vacant lot. It's incredibly hard to represent naturally dilapidated structures because this is Minecraft where everything is blocky and uniform. So to depict this fading white paint, I used chiseled quartz with the edges of brick at the top to make it look like it was peeling. I also ended up filling the lot with sandstone on the ground. Easy said and easy done. I was honestly shocked at how well everything was coming together, and it was giving me more motivation to work on it. Yeah, fuck eating lunch, we got warehouses to build. Shelling! I noticed you could actually see a part of the leftover wall from that building that I mentioned earlier. I assume that's because the building next door and this half wall are interconnected in some way, so I made sure to represent that extra wall layer. Realizing I may want to use different materials to represent the different brick colors, I shelled the other buildings on this block with different colored wool to make life easier when it came time to do that. The brick adding thing, you know, replacing the wool with the brick. The brick wool you know what I mean. At this point, Cyber decided to get off his lazy badunkus for a minute and hopped on the server to help. We started by working on these two chimneys that share a part of the same wall. Simple enough, but let me tell you that it's much easier to make larger squares and rectangles in Build the Earth. The smaller the square gets, the more horrifying it becomes. Yeah, I suppose that's a square if you squint your eyes really hard and close them really tight. After adding the final shell, we had ourselves a completely shelled set of buildings. Okay, so in between these buildings, there's an alleyway, and that alleyway is fully enclosed by buildings on all sides, meaning I couldn't use Street View to gather any details. And also, it's an alley, so no one's really gone out of their way to take pictures online of it. So until my breaking and entering skills improve, we really won't know what's back there, so we'll just have to improvise. These are the tools we have, people. We gotta use them where we can. Clearly around this point, I didn't feel like getting into detailing because I was looking for any excuse to continue shelling. I also spent a long time showing off my buildings to Cyber because I'm a child who craves approval by his peers. At the back of the little fella, I noticed the wall was actually broken a little bit. I didn't know what hell had been unleashed upon this building to create such a post-apocalyptic Mad Maxian wall, but here in BTE we don't judge, we just build. So I represented it the best I could, and I think it turned out pretty nice. If anyone were to look at this, they would surely say, yep, those are some very poorly maintained buildings, I agree. Finally, time to pattern. I used terracotta and brick like we did on the O'Hanlon building to create this reddish brick look. I wanted something to break up the monotony. All of these buildings have differently aged brick, so I just want it to look not so clean. Cyber was working on the lower southwest building. He put a roof on, so I decided to put a roof on the building I was working on too. I also added a parking meter. That's just where it goes, don't ask questions. I had been building for about 6 hours that day, and I was finally losing my mind, so I decided to wrap up the day by adding Godzilla in. Yeah, Godzilla. Anyone who's been to Winston-Salem before knows about the massive Godzilla statue that sits in the middle of Liberty Street. Police have been trying to do something about it for years now. So yeah, if BTE has any problems with Godzilla being here, they clearly just don't know what true and honest recreation looks like. Another day, another building. While I said we had shelled all the buildings earlier, I was actually lying. Pretty cool, right? There were actually 3 separate buildings to the north that had not been touched yet, so I decided it was up to me to make them happen. I finally ran into my first major problem with this build. See, typically when you do the TPLL command, it works properly. All the buildings are squared and everything works out fine. Sometimes it's off by a block or two, but it's usually close enough for BTE work. When I did these buildings, one wall was so far off that it could only be explained one way. The building in real life must be a trapezoid. That is the only explanation I can come up with, because I have tried every trick in the book to make this building a rectangle. But alas, the answer is not to try and shove a square peg in a circle hole. No, the only answer is to accept that sometimes architects are dum-dum brains. Either way, I suppressed my rage and shelled the building. I made them out of brick and terracotta per usual and started adding in the roof lips. Really just employing the same methods as before. And yes, before you ask, I know the carpets are different colors. That's literally how it looks in real life. I don't make mistakes and build the earth, okay? Everything I do is with the utmost concern for accuracy. Including Godzilla, don't worry about him, he's fine. I added in more of those classic garage doors because that is what Main Street is known for. Garage doors are clearly Winston-Salem's #1 export. I used terracotta to represent the protruding parts of the building because if I actually jutted those parts out by one block, it would look gross and weird, and I don't want to do that, and it's going to cut into the sidewalk too much, so we'll just leave it with this lovely color scheme. I put a chimney on the chimney. I like putting little chimney toppers on it. It's very fun. You gotta put chimneys on your chimneys where your chimneys are chimneys. Threw some buttons on for good measure, and yeah, we got ourselves a little building. And just like that, it's time to commit a crime. See, I knew there was going to be an obstacle coming up. The last building on the list had a nice arched roof. Now, if the world were kind to me, this wouldn't have been a problem, but remember, this is a set of buildings that's actually a trapezoid, not a rectangle. I can do arched roofs on a rectangle, that is no problem. But on a trapezoid? Oh boy, were things about to get dicey. I ended up with something like this, and yeah, until I can figure out how to do something better, that's just how it's gonna look. Working on this arched roof actually forced me to look back at the roofs of the other buildings, and I noticed something that Cyber and I had missed. See, the roofs over here, they're not actually flat. They're sloped to allow rainwater to fall off into the alley behind them. So I spent a good bit of time resloping the roofs because while nobody else in the entire world would notice, it was important to me that this detail was represented. And hey, now all of you know it, and you can go around to all your friends and say, hey, did you know the buildings on the corner of 5th Street and Liberty Street in Winston-Salem, North Carolina are sloped and it's on purpose? I did some experiments with banners as windows. I wasn't fully satisfied with the end product, but do I look like somebody who wants to spend the next 2 hours figuring out a better solution? Hell no, I gotta get this video out. So I guess, unless anybody has any objections, it's time for a showcase. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I know it took a bit longer than expected to get this video out, and I apologize for that. I've been a bit distracted with working on other content, and I've also been dealing with this COVID, which I'm just now coming off of. Have you guys been watching those other videos? We've been doing a lot of stuff. We've been doing Sea of Thieves, some Phasmophobia, some Minecraft survival. We are going to be doing some live action stuff coming pretty soon, and you can also expect the next BT video in about a month. It just takes us a while to get these buildings done. It's going to be a good one, but again, these videos just take a long time to come out. I mean, calculating all the footage that I had for this video, just the building process for this episode took about 8 hours of work. But I'm really glad there's been so much support for this series, and trust me, if I could get these videos out more frequently, I would. But again, thank you so much for the support and liking and subscribing. Remember, if you want to see more videos, you can hit that bell and you'll be updated on every new video that comes out. But I guess we've reached the end. So as always, my name is Daniel, and I will see you guys next time.